I guess Pamela's background is a very impressive one, working for many years at the intersection of strategy, change and culture. She's done a great deal of work across the globe, actually, so it's really fitting that she will be speaking on this topic about the Asian century this evening, having worked not only in Australia and New Zealand, but extensively in Singapore, in North America, in the UK, and throughout continental Europe, and working with and for corporations and companies, and some very big companies across the space of professional services, financial services, and associated industries and practices. Working in particular, I think, in a lot of the sort of post-merger acquisition integration issues that many organisations face in trying to come to terms with integrating their culture for high performance in the future. When I first met Pamela and heard about the book Stepping Up, the first thing I saw about that was that it was based on interviews with 100 leaders, you know, from 26 industries and from 16 countries, and I thought, well, you know, that's always pretty interesting. But let's face facts, there are books out there about 100 leaders, and, you know, I read lots of them, and one day I hope to write one myself. But they're not particularly innovative. But then I looked at the book, and I actually read the book, and I actually saw it was a whole lot more than that. And I think it's a really important book for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it is about the 100 leaders and other personal stories which are very affecting, and anecdotes and case studies. But what it does, it locates that within a very, very comprehensive model and account of the way that gender equality and cultural diversity can be built into a model and an understanding of its contributions to organisational performance and productivity, and indeed the future of our polity and our society in this region. The second thing I really like about it, I think, is the fact that it doesn't step away from the tough things about what should we do. There's lots of stuff towards the end of the book, very, very practical strategies for cultural change and transformation. And thirdly, I really like it because it's an Australian book. You know, it speaks to an Australian audience, and it speaks about Australian leadership. And there's just not enough of that work of that calibre around. So I do recommend it to you very seriously. You will see that there is a book stand down the back there as well, and some fabulous discounts tonight that are available on the book for tonight only. So for the moment, though, let me stop talking and get on to the main event and introduce, please, Pamela Young. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Richard.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm not standing at the back to be separate. I just can't sit today. I've got quite a serious back injury, which doesn't bother me at all while I'm standing. Stepping Up. It took months to work out what to call this book. And then it hit me, and it was so obvious in the end. Stepping Up is about leadership, change, transformation, gender equality, cultural diversity, and social change, and who should lead the social change. There is so much in it which made it so difficult to know what to call it. And then one day I realised, well, what am I really trying to say in this book? And it's about helping leaders to recognise that as leaders, you have the right to step up, which means step forward. Step forward to lead other people who want to follow you. And if you feel passionate about your work, your environment, your country, your school, your church, whatever you're a leader in, you have the opportunity to just step forward and say to people, I have an idea, I'm passionate about it, I'd like to share it with you. So would you like to know where I'm going? And if you feel similar to me, I would be really happy for you to join me. So when Stepping Up arrived, it just made so much sense for a book that's quite complex. When I started out to write this book, it started out a little bit broader, and then it came to me that maybe we should put it into maybe 3 or 4 separate books. But in the end, I decided to overwhelm you by putting it all in one book, because the elements are so vital to one another. And I didn't know how to separate out them. And I thought, well, if I only give you a piece, then you don't come back for the second half, you still won't know necessarily how these things fit together. So it's all in the one. And what I'd like to do today is give you a sense of some of the things in there which can help you as leaders to go forward. So I'm going to race through this because I pack a lot into my presentation. So at any point, just call my name and I'll find you, and we can answer questions along the way. otherwise we can have some questions towards the end. So, this is from the opening page, and it sort of sums it up in a bit of a way. Australia is at the crossroads on its growth curve, and so much about this book is the how do organisations and countries and we as individuals overcome those little barriers that we have in our growth curve and our journey. It has a decision to make: resist the change and face the consequences, or evolve its thinking and take the next step towards prosperity and a better future. And it seemed to me when I came back after a 10-year journey in Asia and Europe that this was going to be one of our biggest challenges. And then, you know, I've been in Australia since 2004, so in the journey from that 8-year period, this became one of the most fundamental things that I was quite obsessed with, which was Asia, where I lived for twice, for a joint period, total period of 5 years, is such a big growth region of the world, and it's so exciting to operate there. Not everyone has a positive experience, but I did. I absolutely loved it, and I came away feeling that there was so much more to be gained from this relationship. And when I arrived in Australia, I thought, gosh, you know, we've got this at our back door. But then I realised that we were not necessarily all thinking the same. So I borrowed this slide from Sol Estlake in one of his presentations, which he generously loaned for me to put in the book, because you can see that for a very long time, Asia was actually the dominant region of the world. Now they, in terms of GDP and growth and growth rates and so forth, and you can see in the last 2 decades that Asia is coming back. Europe and the USA and UK dominated since about 1800s and 1900s, but that's changing now because the growth again is coming to Asia. This is another of his slides that shows that the export trade relationship we have with our old Western trading partners in that first slide is slowing, whereas the growth is coming from Asia and India. So there's no doubt that there is a major global shift, and this shift in global power is something that we cannot live without. We have to face the fact that changes are going on around us, and no matter how comfortable we are on our lovely, big, comfortable island with great beaches and 100 years of wonderful growth, we have these challenges to face. The BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, they're known commonly as the BRIC countries. They are becoming now as equally important as the economic countries of the past in Europe and America. Western alliances are no longer enough for those of us who live in the West, and we have to get more comfortable with building alliances with lots of other countries, not just China and India, but also other major growth countries like Russia and Brazil. That this notion that a nation can act alone worked for us for over 100 years, and it made us very strong. We became very independent and very capable. There are only a few islands which are leading Western nations. There's Australia, there's New Zealand, there's the UK, and then you've got countries like America, which is quite isolated also, apart from one country to the north and one to the south. But those of us who are isolated have to start to think about joining up, because we've become very successful, but we've had to be very strong to become successful on our island because we didn't have anyone to help. So when I went away and lived in parts of the world which are surrounded by lots of countries, I noticed what this isolation means for us. And people who live elsewhere, and there's quite a few of them in the room tonight, who have lived in other countries and other parts of the world, when you come back you notice the distance, don't you? Yes, you notice the distance and the isolation. Here's a quote from one of the 100 in the book who features quite highly, which was the former chief executive partner of King and Wood Mallesons, and I like this because it was a very positive remark. The firm Mallesons, where are you? Back there. Got a couple of partners here tonight, but they've been in the region for 2 decades, and they have recently done their first China merger, if you didn't know, and that's a great success story. So China's a fascinating place. It's one of the most competitive and extremely difficult places to operate in, but you just have to be there. And so it's a positive but a very powerful message which says we need to think about getting involved. Here are some images of the region. 6 to 8% growth. It's been as high as up to 8 to 10%, hasn't it, in some parts of Asia, and it's slowed a little bit. But these countries are really cooking. They have technology and transportation systems and financial systems that completely exceed many Western nations. Then you've got the Middle East and the markets in the Middle East, which are growing and cooking at the same time as well. Dubai plans to be on the design centre of the world by 2020, and they're well on the way to achieving that notion. And then you've got major cities of the world that are struggling to grow, flat-lined growth curves for quite some time. Not only are we struggling to grow economically, but we're struggling to grow physically. And this is an image of a bike track, which is somebody's idea of a solution to the difficulty getting around the world. They say that the top 50s of the world are going to be mostly in China and other regions of Asia. The top list are the cities that are going to drop off the top 50, and Melbourne is included in that. And the bottom list are the cities that are going to join the top 50. And this is only 11 years away. It's not far, it's just tomorrow. And so we do have to think about it. Change is inevitable. Because I've been a change agent for 25 years, I feel very uncomfortable with change. And I spook people sometimes because I come up with quite innovative, creative strategies for change, and it might be too far for people's comfort level. So I always have to remember, but it is inevitable, it is going to happen. You can see it, it's quite determinable, you can anticipate it. And you know that things are going to shift, so you may as well try and anticipate where they go. And you do have to prepare a response. If you sit back and think someone else will take care of it, you can be pretty sure you're going to end up in an uncomfortable place or somewhere that you don't want to end up. So you know things are going to move, so you may as well try and anticipate it and be prepared to drive that change. So, one of the things I did not anticipate when I did the first draft of Stepping Up was to write anything about me and my story. It was not in there. But as I went through the journey of interviewing 100 people, it took me nearly a year because I had to take a break in the middle of it for some personal reasons. And people said to me, gosh, that's an interesting story, are you going to put that in? And I went, no, I hadn't thought about that. But after I heard that response to sharing and swapping stories with people, it occurred to me, how can I expect other leaders to step up if I don't put in there how I faced some of my demons and biases and discriminations that I had to address in my journey. So I did write a chapter in there about it, and I'm just going to share some of it with you now because it's quite relevant to some of the lessons as we go through. So, getting the aha, there I was sitting chatting to a partner at KPMG. Sometime in the late 80s, I was a new graduate, I'm doing my MBA, and I'm consulting already because I was quite confident that I could do this thing called consulting. As a new graduate, I had done 2 years in marketing management roles, and then off I went. And he said to me one day, Pamela, you're fabulous, but there's one thing missing from your resume, overseas experience. And I got such a shock and thought, crikey, there's a flaw. I was quite shocked that there was something that wasn't perfect in my track record, and it troubled me for quite some time. So I started to expand my consulting work across the Tasman and started getting some clients in Australia, and then I thought, I think we better add Asia to this because the Asia Pacific region is becoming quite important. So I first came to Sydney and built some clients there, but then I put a toe into Singapore. And as soon as I did that, I realised, oh my God, the world is so much bigger than New Zealand and Australia, and it's so different up there, and I don't know anything about it. There is another major challenge, like another, not so much a flaw, but my world was opened up. And I spent a couple of years toing and froing doing the Asia Pacific trip, Sydney, Auckland, Singapore, Wellington, and then I thought, no, this is no good. I need to totally immerse into Singapore, so I let everything else go, and I took on a project with a local law firm, which was a former client, and I went in to help them corporatize and westernize this business as the only Caucasian there for 3 years, working amongst Singapore, Chinese, Indian, and Malay cultures. It was the best thing I could have done for my entire career and for my life in so many ways. Here we are, a Western leader in an Eastern environment, having to rethink absolutely everything that I ever thought would work, and did work and had worked in the past. I had to stop and think, how am I going to get these people to want to follow? Have you ever been in that position of not knowing, or not having had that experience? How am I going to get these people to follow or want to come on this journey? And I'll explain as we go through what some of those challenges were. After a few years, I was thinking, okay, what next? Better go to London. Everybody goes to London. That will be great. I'll feel a little bit more comfortable when I get to London because I know that culture better. Not so. It was in fact, working in Singapore and working in Asia was a better, more positive growing experience than in London, because the difference was obvious and the difference was expected. And the difference was out there, and they knew that people in the West behaved this way, and they made allowances for it. But when you're from the Antipodes and you arrive in London and they think you're all the same because you're from the colonies, there are no adjustments made and no allowances made. So therefore it's much more difficult, and you stumble on things and you realise, oops, that was a really embarrassing moment. So after being away for 19 years, I thought, I'm coming home now, I'm coming to Sydney, this is great. This will feel more like home. And I don't know how many of you have been to New Zealand, but any Kiwis in the room? 2, good, okay, another one over here, I think. So yeah, it was quite an interesting surprise, because by the time I had done this journey, I had forgotten who I was, what were my real values, where did I come from? Because when you are totally immersed into different cultures as an immigrant, you go through major challenges, and which now gives me the authority to speak on behalf of all immigrants to Australia about the challenges of being an immigrant in Australia. I can see some people nodding. It is quite difficult being an immigrant and having to face things differently. So when I got through this journey, and these were pretty much my challenges, which when you look at the list and read through it, you might go, oh yeah, okay. Each one of these challenges were massive in each of those 3 total immersions: Singapore, Europe, and coming back here. And when in Rome, do as the Romans do. That's the biggest challenge of all, because you have to adopt the local values. You need to be sensitive, listen, and try and fit in. And that is quite difficult because it's not your core competency. And so I say to people now who say to me, as they did in the book, we hire 50-50 Asian Australian from the graduate pool every year, and after a few years the Asians are no longer here. Why would that be? And I try and share with them what it was like to be an immigrant and how you have to box away your experiences and try and fit into this new environment. And there is a part of you that gets tucked away, and there's a part of you that doesn't get to play at its best level. And so therefore, when we hire immigrants and foreign people into our organisations, they are not performing at their best level either, because there is an element of trying to fit in, and there's discomfort that goes with it. So I talk a lot throughout stepping up in that. Here is what you see when you come to Australia first. This is what you hear about, which is what a great culture it is. The people are independent, they're sporty, they're individualistic, they're really successful at many things, and then you start to get a sense of the island culture and the isolation and what that does to our growth and behaviour. When you look at 100 years of Australia's outstanding performance as a nation, these are the things that have helped Australia be great. After a while, you start to notice these other aspects of Australian culture which are not so helpful and can be a bit of a challenge. The gender roles and the behaviours that women take on in corporate Australia are different from what I have experienced anywhere else. There is competition between men in the workforce, there is competition between women in the workforce, but competition between women in the Australian workforce is different. And when I first got here, I described it to some friends over a dinner party, and I said, "What is that?" And they said, "Oh, that's the Australian woman climbing up the corporate ladder, and when she gets to the top, she pulls it up behind her." I had never heard that phrase in my entire global journey, and I was completely unaware of the queen bee. And I thought, how can I be that naive? Am I stupid? Am I blind? Am I so self-interested that I didn't see it happening to anybody else? But it's not an attractive feature. And so we have to ask ourselves, why do we do that? When I started to compare, my past experiences with what I was experiencing here, these are some of the things that stood out to me, and they are quite big differences, and they do challenge Australia and business leaders and us as individuals, because a lot of people come back from working overseas and they come to work in Australia and they feel like they're playing with Lego Tinker Toys, because the business here is small, the markets are small, the companies are small, the value of dollars is small, the revenue turnover is small, the profits are small by comparison with where they have come from. And so the experience is much less. So when we try and put our people to operate in global markets, they haven't quite, if they haven't been away, they haven't got the skills and capabilities. So the fellow in KPMG who said to me, "Pamela, you're fantastic, but you haven't got any overseas experience," he knew what he was talking about. And it took me, 10 to 15 years to work out what the value in all of that was and how it was going to play out. Language ability is a really big deal, and I talk about that in lots of different places. And I did quite a bit of study on the views about language and the value of language and how it was going to impact in the business market. I'll talk a bit more about that as we go. But I rang around friends and emailed buddies all over the world and said, "How many hours do your children get language training in junior school?" And this is very sort of anecdotal. It's not scientific, but it's what my buddies emailed me back. At 4 in the morning, and still working on the jolly thing. How many have you got? And how many hours? And how many languages? European nations and Asian nations dedicate so much more time to learning languages because they are surrounded by other nations who speak these languages. So they can go to a meeting in the morning and speak German, the next afternoon, that afternoon they're speaking French, and then they go out to dinner and have an English dinner with an international audience. And so they can, it's not just a matter of flipping between them, because when you learn a language, you learn a lot about their culture and their behaviours and their values and how it all works in their nation. We don't have that, and a lot of the people I spoke to who are Australians working in Asia or Asians working in Australia who have had an education in Australia said to me, this is one of our biggest challenges, is our lack of capability around languages. So I felt pretty passionate about that topic and covered a bit. Dharma Chandran is probably known to many of you. He is a Malaysian-born Indian. He comes from the south of Malaysia, just across in Johor, just across from Singapore. So he has had a pretty Western upbringing, came here to finish school and stayed. But he's been back to Asia several times in his career working with global professional firms. He had a lot to say, and I just pulled this one out. British and Europeans have this experience of running colonies, and Asians prefer to work with people who bring these skills, and we don't have that experience. And a number of people I interviewed did say to me that the Europeans do a better job because they come with cross-cultural capability, are culturally sensitive, they'll integrate with the locals, and they bring some language capability. And by contrast, there are lots of quotes in the book. I suppose there must be 700 or 800 quotes in the book from these interviews. So there's a lot of, real-time, real sense of what people think. But there were too many for my liking that said, we come up there with a sense of arrogance, we try and tell the locals what to do, we tell them our way is better, and they don't appreciate that. 20 years ago they needed this knowledge, but today they need leadership, not technical skills, so the arrogance is really starting to grate on their nerves. Just going to go to the website for a minute. I These are the questions I put to the 100 leaders. Just before you go, sorry Vanessa. The outline, my interview outlines sort of ran through these topics. We talked about Asia, we talked about the potential in Asia and the companies that were operating in Asia, and then we talked a lot about the Asian communities in Australia and whether we thought that we were tapping into them enough. Just look through the room. I see one gentleman who might be from Asia, but that's, and maybe another with some Asian heritage too. It's 3, so the numbers aren't 4. So the numbers are never great. Last week I was at a university event, and I think there were maybe a couple of hundred people there, and I counted 4 people with an Asian background in this leadership group from our 5 of our leading universities, and said, if there are so many Asian students coming through your universities, why are there only 4 out of 200 here? Why are they not coming through? Where are they? Anybody care to give me the answer? Or suggest why they're not coming through?
You're doing medicine.
Give me a moment. Medicine. There is a concentration line on the streets of the city. That's true. I talked about, asked questions about Australian culture, which was a bit sensitive for some people. I should have mentioned at the start, when I first told people I would like to write this book, and what did you think? And I tested my idea on a few people. They said, this is very brave. 5 people said that to me, and it almost put me off, because I thought, crikey, they're trying to give me a message not to ask these questions. It's a bit spooky. What is this going to do to me? And then I realised that every one of those people were female. So, gender equality is a very big issue, but it's only in 2 chapters out of 12, so don't be fooled like so many who think that because I'm a woman, the whole book is about gender. It's about so many other things. Cultural diversity, social change is where the book ends up. If we're going to make a difference, how are we going to do that? Who's going to be the social change that's required to achieve it? So I just wanted to show you some of the quotes on the website, because it gives you a sense. If you go to steppingupaustralia.com, you'll see a bunch of, firstly there's a list of the 100 people and their bios, which are also at the back, can I scroll down? You have to do that? Okay. So the quotes are clustered together in these. Sorry, Vanessa, would you mind just going back up to Anne Sherry? There's a disconnect between what we say and what we do. We say we're part of Asia, and we're the best talent, but our behaviour says the opposite. It's the same with women in meritocracy. We say yes, but the behaviour says the opposite. Anne Sherry, it was extremely articulate, and there's some beautiful quotes from her all the way through the book, and very brave. She was very brave in putting her thoughts out there. David Gonski's point is that, you know, we're running out of runway in the West, and the Asian nations are the ones where the growth is. If you just wander down a little bit to the next section, keep going down. Stop there, please. Robert Kerr, again, a really interesting man. I find that people in the engineering field, a lot of people feel that because it's a very male-dominated environment, but I always find that there's a high degree of sensitivity and awareness about diversity in the engineering firms that I've worked in. If you ask people at a barbecue whether mateship, egalitarianism and a fair go were Australia's core values, they might say yes, but mateship only applies if you look like me. And a lot of people came to this same summary. I asked them about the values of the nation, and those 3 values, mateship, egalitarianism and have a fair go, I quite often put out there as our core values. I didn't find more than maybe this many who believe that there's some current value in those 3. So if that's the case, then we need to look at a conversation to identify what are our core values going forward, if those are no longer relevant today. So I'll just flip down to a few more. Hugh Mackay, he was one of the people I tested my idea for the book on at the start, because he's an author and has written quite a lot of books on Australian culture. And I went to a book launch of his. Am I doing it time? Sorry.
About 10 minutes.
And so I said to him, what do you think about this idea? And he was fabulous. I interviewed him several times throughout the journey. There's a sense that immigrants should have to start at the bottom, and that's somehow good for them. They can't just wander into an expected job, they have to work their way up. A chief executive said that to me, and I said, why not? Why can't they just come back from overseas and expect a top job? And the answer was, they can't just waltz in here and expect a top job. It's a competitive market. They have to prove themselves. Do you think that's right? Can I have a nod or a shake of heads?
No, I don't agree.
You think it's right?
No.
No,
I don't
right.
agree.
I said to him, well, that's incredible, because I didn't have to do that when I went to Singapore, and I didn't have to prove myself when I went to London. Why do we have to prove ourselves when we come back to Australia? After we've been in the bigger, wider world, why do we have that attitude? And the recruiters that I interviewed confirmed that their advice to people is go down a couple of levels, accept lesser pay, prove yourself. A couple of years you can get back to where you were. And do you know what? Some of the people I interviewed in Asia came back, experienced that, and went, oh, this is just too awful. And they went back to Asia, and they're staying there till they retire. So we've lost that talent and expertise forever. Okay, I think we might go back to the presentation, but there's a lot on there if you want to have a look through at some other stage. Okay. Condition change. So we must equip our leaders to handle change, lead change, and meet the challenges of change. Handle change and leading change are two completely different things. Handle change is a personal thing because, like I said, for those of you who have lived in other countries, you will know what handling change means. It's quite different from being a change agent and showing people how to make adjustments, set strategies, and restructure companies. It's quite a different thing. So let's just have a quick look. 1980s view of leadership. This is probably what the MBA program looked like in the 1980s. I did a traditional master's, but my colleagues alongside me who hadn't done an undergraduate in business were doing the MBA. And this is, these were the sorts of things that were taught in those days. And then maybe a decade later, we've got a little bit more sophisticated and started looking at our behavioural skills and talents as leaders. And the human factor came into being. And when I first started, my thesis was, how does culture and values impact the bottom line? There was nothing on this being taught, but I was working in a services environment and everything that was taught was products. And so I was thinking to myself, behaviourally, this is quite a challenge because you can put a strategy in place, but if you can't get the people to want to come with you, then that's where the whole cultural piece began. So by about sort of 90s and 2000, we started thinking about those things. But now, today, when you ask what does a leader today have to be and what skills do we need to give them and how do we develop ourselves, we absolutely have to have a world view. And you can't get that by sitting in Australia. So it's really challenging and difficult if you haven't got a company who's prepared to back you and sponsor you to go on an overseas trip. A lot of leaders here and a lot of executives here in companies tell me that people don't want to go. They've always said that. They don't want to go because they've got children in school. They don't want to go because they're comfortable. They don't want to go because they don't want to leave the family. But at some point you need to go and do a stint, total immersion, and experience it. And it doesn't really matter where it is, but please try to choose something that is a bit different from your own environment, because you will learn about what I call an international citizen. There's quite a few international citizens in the room. And so you do pick up and you get to the point that you do forget who you are. You forget a little bit about what your core cultures are, don't you? So you pick up this, this new way of being. We must absolutely be Asia ready. We absolutely must feel comfortable with going into Asian countries, South American countries, African countries. When I hear an accent, I get quite excited. Oh, where are you from? Which part? What happens over there? And I just absolutely love it. Soak it up. Can't get enough of it. Okay, futures leaders need to do three things. Firstly, they need to be able to operate in a global market, and it's just no longer good enough, as Uschi Schreiber said, the idea of operating in a single market is just so outdated and it's no longer appropriate. These are the things that we need to be comfortable with. We have to, as leaders, understand what globalization means, what it looks like, how it's impacting us. And absolutely, those of you who've got children, you know now that your children are hungry to be engaged in the rest of the world. My son's 12 and he said, "Mum, I just don't get it. Why do people think that people with dark brown skin are different?" And he just cannot fathom it. So that was quite challenging. How do I explain this? Gosh, darling, goes back about 2,000 years or 5,000 years, and you start the story. And so children are so accepting because their world is different from ours and they've got access through the internet to so many different nationalities and people and so forth. They see the goodness. And so our challenge is to help them be these great global leaders and not to squash or reinforce the old values. The second thing is that we have to appreciate the world issues, because no matter what company you are operating in, these things will impact on you. Because if you're operating in a global space, what's happening in the world, the global issues in the world, do become a really important part of whatever you're doing. For example, if you are a food exporter, you're going to be thinking about the world food requirements and the different cultures. If you are in engineering or a services environment, a services industry, and you're looking out to the world of all those industrializing countries, there's a huge opportunity for people who build infrastructure, for healthcare services, for insurance services, for aged care services. All of those services can be shipped or transferred and sold into those markets that need it in the developing world. And so all those countries that have those needs are the places for us to be focused on. The third thing that these global leaders, absolutely have to get their heads around, and we are so challenged by this list, is that we have to be completely comfortable with every body that contains talent. And at the moment, only the top things on this list are top of mind for Australians. I was explaining to a couple of people when I first went out to interview, gender equality had been on the radar since the mid-2010 when the ASX asked for reporting on gender. There were only 25 of the 100 people that I interviewed who ended up in the chapter on Asia, because only 1/4 of the companies or the people I spoke to were actually working in Asia or had lived in Asia. So that's a very small proportion. Some of the challenges on this list are big, and the talent is everywhere, and we have quite a lot of barriers and biases to overcome. The top 5 are covered extensively in the questions and answers and the quotes throughout the book. The first half of Stepping Up is pretty much the research report and the what needs to be addressed, and the second half is how do we do it. So, building this environment, there's a lot about being a leader, which is about building your organisation culture. Can I just have a show of hands for people who feel that they already influence consciously their organisation culture in what they do? They're consciously driving cultural change. We're all sitting on this side. There's quite a few, isn't it? So, once upon a time, culture was not on the MBA program, it wasn't taught in universities, and it wasn't done in companies. And when it first people became conscious of the need to influence behavioural change, it ended up in the HR department. And it didn't get very far because people thought it was a functional task, but it's absolutely not. And in a lot of the work that's been done in recent years, people show this cultural change starts off in HR, and then it moves up into operational management, and sometime in a decade or two, it'll end up in the chief executive's office. And I flip that around in Stepping Up and say, no, it's got to start in the chief executive's office. And then it moves, and once it's embedded, it gets delegated operationally, and then When it's fully up and running and people are very comfortable with this whole notion and it's in part of your skin, then it can be maintained in the HR department. So you need, as leaders, to get very comfortable with understanding culture. So I'm just going to race through this in the interest of time, because it's all in the book if you're interested in learning about how to drive culture change. Okay, nations, organisations and individuals. Just flip back there. This is a very important part of the second half of the book, which describes, as a leader, we need to be driving change in all these three things. They are completely connected, and it's the culture circuit. And one impacts on the other. Nations have this challenge. 21st century, Asian century, nations need to be thinking about how the cultures and values of the nation are driving business and which people they attract. And as a nation, Australia, I showed you at the beginning, we have some cultural challenges that we've got to be thinking about. Just another quick quote from Anne Sherry. The world is changing, everyone talks of the 21st century being the Asian century. And then she goes on to say, well, if that's the case, what's the plan? Now, there is a plan, and Julia Gillard put out her government put out a plan, and I critique it in here. It's a great plan, but it's full of tactical measures, and it doesn't address the values and assumptions that we have at the bottom of our culture that are going to undermine that plan. And I've detailed that quite clearly. Organisations, we absolutely must have courageous leadership. We absolutely must be addressing these diversity challenges. And as leaders, if we don't do that, we will not be effective in operating with the Asian century. Diane Grady, really interesting observation here. The obstacles that make it hard for women are the same that make it hard for Asians to get up into the organisations, which is that question before. Second paragraph there, when a senior male executive is about to take an employee to meet one of his best clients, he might consider it uncomfortable and somewhat risky to take a woman or an Asian because they're different. That's a really quite gutsy thing to say, isn't it? So we'll just take a white man because we know that the client will feel comfortable with a white man, so that would be a safer bet, which is just quite confronting. High performance 21st century leaders must try and, fit this list as closely as possible. We need to be learning some languages, which is a big challenge because we only have 1 hour of language in the junior school in Australia. So to compete in the world with countries where they speak 2 languages from the ages 5 or 7 is quite going to be a real big challenge for us. We have to become global citizens. We must get some Asian experience and be comfortable with working across cultures and so on and so forth. That last point, collaborate with others. We need to build networks internationally and start making friends in other places. I'll just bypass some of the quotes. So in summary, productivity and growth of this nation was what set me on this path. Stepping up is to encourage leaders to recognise that these challenges are definitely going to cause us major limitations if we don't address them in terms of our productivity and growth. Women are all underperforming. Immigrants are all underperforming. They are underproductive because they reach a barrier. Not only is there a glass ceiling, but there's a bamboo ceiling. And they leave their careers and they go into cottage industries and they find other ways to make a buck because it's too hard to stay within the system. And so therefore we have to find a new way. Second point, to achieve economic and social development, men and women must work together. And a lot of the initiatives for gender equality are male driven, and we are putting the man up there and saying, please fix it. And I just have to question and challenge that strategy because women are just as capable of achieving change as the men, and unless we demonstrate that we can work together and we've got respect to work together as equals, we will never get there. We can't have men fix it like fixing the leaky tap. To be part of a more connected world, we must involve all the cultures in that circuit. Because if you just tamper with one, and this is the other reason why I set off to write this book, was because several chief executives said to me, Pamela, we've been trying to do the gender thing for so many years, a decade or more. We take 2 steps forward and 1 back. We think we've just got the women coming through to partnership and then a whole bunch of them leave. And I said, well, that's because you're competing with the values in society. You can do as many culture change programs internally at this business as you like. But every year, 15% leave and another 15% arrive. And then the next year, another 15%, and another 50%. You add all that up, your first year as a chief executive, that's 45% turnover. And so the values that come in from outside are always going to be competing. So you have to shift the values in society to get diversity in corporate Australia, which comes to that question of social change. I just put this in to give you a sense of all the cultures that are impacting on your organisation culture. Okay? There are dozens of them. Your employees come from lots of different places in society, and they bring all those cultures and values with them. And then they, have a career in lots of different industries and different sectors and different cities, and they bring all those values and cultures with them too. And so you end up with all these influences. And sometimes Sparta comes to mind. And I would hate to think that Sparta, which is the ruins here, which used to be, one of the most thriving cities in ancient Greece, is going to be Australia, while that lovely little new city in the background is going to be Asia. We're only 22 million people. Asia has billions of people in it. And I know we're comfortable, and I know we're happy, and I know we're rich, and I know we've got beautiful beaches, and we're really lovely people, and we've got great children, and we've got so much to celebrate. But there is stuff going on outside of our shores that we have to participate in, or there's there is a chance that, in 1,000 years from now, we could be Sparta. Do we care that it's not going to happen this century? Probably not. I won't cover this because it is in the book, but there's some stuff in there about how you change the culture and values. There are some case studies on these 3 great nations. These are beautiful pictures of these very happy countries which were very safe and secure. They had assumptions that their children were safe, their beaches were safe, their cities and their buildings were safe, and then along comes catastrophe, blows all their assumptions of their safety and their security and their good well-being out of the water, and all of a sudden, no longer do they think they're safe. Bad things can happen. Right? Our children are no longer safe. People can massacre them. We can get destroyed, and what we valued once is no longer there. Those cases are all in the book. Business changes overnight with a change, right? Things happen, and all of a sudden, hello, it's not the same anymore. David Jones and Maya are no longer going to be, competitors. They're going to get into bed together. Hello, imagine if you are those staff and you're someone who's been working there for 10, 15, 20 years, and all of a sudden the person that you've been competing against forever is your colleague. These things are quite challenging. There are 3 cases of 3 global organisations that have overcome assumptions to shift the culture. They did it over a long period of time, but they do talk, and I discovered these stories, wonderful stories about how these organisations had leaders, male leaders, who championed women, changed the assumptions of the organisation from, women can survive in these organisations, and there's some wonderful stories about how other organisations have achieved the change. So really good thinking, and they demonstrate how they shifted assumptions, which shifted behaviours, which shifted the outcomes as an organisation. So take home number 1: Asian-centric leaders must embrace the change. We do need to think about adjusting our social values to ensure economic relevance. It's not a nice to have. We're not doing the cultural diversity and the gender thing because we think it's, something we should do to make people feel good. It's an economic imperative. As a leader, I think sometimes we look in the mirror and we see what we think we're being or who we think we are, but sometimes we need to dig a bit deeper to realise that actually there's a different person that we could model for others, and there are choices in life. And frankly, it's just really, really, really rewarding when you can find the time to put something into a passion, find the courage, because it does require courage, and you absolutely have to back yourself because no one's going to tell you that you're on the right track and give you that support, because we have a tall poppy syndrome down under, and despite the fact that we're raised to step up, step forward and be great, you know, that only applies when you're little. As you get older, the more you do that, the more you get bashed for it. I heard someone go, You know, it applies when you're little because people think it's cute, you know, to step up and move forward. And people, you know, pat people on the back all the time and say, oh, look how courageous that young person is giving it a go and starting a company or doing this or doing that. But as you get older, the more you do it, the more you get bashed for it and you get told to get back into your box. So you do have to back yourself if you've got a really good idea and you want to drive change. So have some fun as you do it.
Thanks, Pamela. Some, take a couple of questions. I think we've got time for a few questions. Yeah, there we go. Nick.
Hi, Pamela. Great presentation. Got a lot out of it. I also saw a lot of parallels with the Diversity Council Australia luncheon I attended recently. They had a debate comprised of panels of company directors, and they were exploring the issue of quotas and whether quotas are required for female representation on company boards of publicly listed companies in Australia. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and whether or not quotas are required to help shift us toward a more high-performance environment.
I put that question to most people, and a lot of people had shifted in the 12 months that it took me to do those 100 interviews. At the beginning of that period, people were very anti-quotas because it had just been suggested. By the end of the 12 months, which was, I interviewed from May 11 to May 12, and as I say, the ASX changes came in mid-10. So that journey between, you know, say 12 months later and 24 months after that change, it put it on the table and it made it okay to talk about it. And therefore, during that journey, people started to say to me, and you'll read on the website or in the book, their quotes where they say, I didn't think quotas was necessary, but now I can see that the change is going to take too long. So people are starting to think that if we want change quickly, putting in some measure to force the change is the answer. When you look at the experience in Norway, they put their changes in place in 2004 in public companies and 2006 in public companies. And they set a target of 40% and they overshot it. They got to 44% of females on boards. The interesting thing was for them that the women who were on boards just got more board positions as opposed to there being more women getting boards. And so a lot of women ended up with 4, 5, 6 board positions, which is ridiculous, it's too many. But my personal opinion is absolutely. Because if you look at how long it's taken to get from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, 50 or 60 years, women have been educating and stepping up and trying to balance work and home and everything else. And I'm just going, oh, for goodness sake, have we really got another 50 years to wait to get from 12% of women on boards to what, 24%? And it could take 50 years. So if it's a pace thing, and also in change, because I've done this for a long time now, and I've learned over the years that when people face change for the first time, they are nervous about sanctions, which is what quotas are. Bad behaviour, you get a sanction. And all change programs start off with just the carrot and not the stick. But by the time they get to 1 or 2 or 3 change programs, they realise that they need the stick as well. If you only have the carrot, which is the positive reinforcement, people can opt out. You get passive-aggressive people just sitting there going, oh, I'll just pretend I'm on for the girls, you know. Or I'll pretend that I'm happy with the changes in this organisation. So they don't speak up and they passively and aggressively undermine the programs. If you have to make a choice, so you've got a carrot and a stick, you can't do that because there's a consequence as well as a reward.
Thank
so
you.
I say, let's do quotas. Anything you disagreed with? Oh, yes.
I didn't disagree. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I'm curious about the social change element that you discussed, and who bears the responsibility to start that? And are there any models that you've seen around the world, countries that have got the social elements a little bit more advanced than Australia?
The last question I put to everyone was, because the interviews went for about 2 hours, and some of them I did twice, some of them I went back and we did another hour or two, so it's a lot of chat. By the time I got to the end of all the interviews, I said, if we agree that we need to drive some social change to get diversity, and you know, people had pretty much said yes, we have to shift some of those values about gender and about integration of immigrants, and about who should lead. Then I said, well, if we agree we need some social change, who should lead that? It was not a well-answered question. People would say, some of the immediate answers were, gosh, that's interesting, I haven't thought about that. And I'm thinking, well, you're a serious leader in this country, you probably should have thought about that. So the answers ranged from the government, the education department, the business, somebody else, and probably only this many said, well, you and me, of course, we should do it. So, I mean, what do you think is the answer?
It has to be us. We have to.
Dead right, it's you and me. It is us. We have to, you know, make this happen for ourselves. And one of the issues that we debated a lot was, you know, your point about the Diversity Council. You know, their view is that we shouldn't try and be the melting pot like America. Well, I completely disagree, because I have done so many merger integrations, and I know from my experience that if you bang a couple of companies together and you don't integrate the cultures, you're going to get a divestment 10 years down the track, or 5 years down the track, or even 1 year down the track, because culture and powerful subcultures can be explosive. So therefore, allowing all these people to live in Australia from all these different countries, including New Zealand and Britain and Afghanistan, everywhere, we come from everywhere, but to allow us in and then not to allow people who are not Caucasian to come through to the top, which is what's happening, is not good practice. So I believe we do need to, you know, think from a social change point of view, not only discuss genders and the roles of genders, but we also have to discuss the immigration policy, because we have so many nationalities living here, but we only have Caucasian man at the top. So it's not just that it's dominated by males and the women would need to get there, but why are the nationalities that live here not coming through either? So they're serious questions, and as I say, that people were quite challenged at the beginning of the process, but by the end of the process, people got more comfortable with those answers. And so who should lead it? We should all lead it. But I recommend, in the back of the book, that we should have a private-public partnership to run a national campaign. If we can do drugs, alcohol, diabetes in children, all these other social issues, why can we not do gender? And why can we not do let's get comfortable with these different nationalities? There's a fantastic ad running at the moment by Open Universities. Have you seen the one with the little caricatures of the little heads bobbing around? Have you seen that? It's a lovely ad, and it encourages everybody to come to university. But right towards the end of their first take, at the end the young girl goes, I'd like to be a teacher. And then the boy goes, I'd like to be an engineer. So we just stereotype them into their gender roles. After this wonderful ad, which was so great up until that point, every washing machine ad says, and my little boy plays rugby at the weekend and comes home with such dirty news, but it's okay because look, Vanish will get rid of it. Well, why is it always the woman cleaning up, you know, for the boy's mess? And so again, we're stereotyping that the women will do the cleaning up. And yet a lot of men, you know, buy Vanish and live on their own and do the washing. It's just sort of really bad stereotyping. So social change is absolutely needed. Who should drive it? Who should drive it? Which organisation should be in social change? That social change initiative. Any ideas? Which organisations should we put forward? I'm doing a lecture now. Well, I finished the book and then I thought about it, woke up in the morning and went, oh, Pamela, you coward, you didn't say who it should be. Did you get to that page, Richard?
No, who should it be?
And I only had half a page of space left, and because the index and everything had gone in. And right. So I went back in and I said, it should be the organisations that touch everyone in Australia. And on the government side, who is that? Education, health, ATO, who else did I say? Police. Everyone's got an association with those organisations. On the private side, everyone has a telephone. Anyone from Telstra here? Everyone has a bank. Everyone has to eat food. Everyone flies with Qantas. Why are those organisations not together with health and education and those others and saying, okay, so I've put it to a few of them and said, 10% of your marketing budget, 10% of your staff turnover budget, because if you could, shift these attitudes in society, you wouldn't be bringing those attitudes into the business, so you wouldn't have such a diversity problem in your company. So that's where the book ends up, with that recommendation.
On that note, now that we have the answer, I'd really like to thank Pamela for provocative, comprehensive, stimulating conversation tonight and raising these issues, which I think we need to continue to raise and talk about in our organisations and in our schools and with our telcos. And
yes.
I think that's absolutely right. So thanks again. Thanks very much, Pamela.
Thanks.
Thanks again for coming, folks. I hope you can stay around for some networking and enjoy some more hospitality, please. Thanks very much for coming.